Hey, welcome to another episode of Tarot to the Nines, and we have reached the number 8. And it's slightly unusual actually that I'm making the video at this particular time, because where I am, if I just glance at my clock, it is nearly half past the witching hour, nearly half past midnight, which is not a time that I normally make videos at. But when inspiration strikes, and you've just got to go with the flow. However, because it is nearly half past midnight, I'm probably going to need to wear my glasses to read my notes, because I'm a bit tired and it is a bit dark. And, oh yes, right. So normally, of course, by the way, how do you like the t-shirt? Don't fall in. It's like a vortex pulling you in. If I look at that with my glasses on, then we're completely scuppered because there's no coming back. Normally I would start with a bit of a canter through the mathematical properties of the number 8, and I will get to that. However, I actually want to start with, first of all, a quick look at the cards themselves that are in the constellation, because look how many of them there are. Now, I am cheating a bit here because not all of these cards are actually in the constellation of Strength. I call it the constellation of Strength because I use the Rider-Waite-Smith system. Others, of course, will have Justice as their number 8 card, and that's absolutely fine. You'll find that you can use either of these interchangeably in relation to the tarot constellations, although Justice and Strength obviously don't mean the same thing, but it's not a problem if you choose to have 8 as being Justice and then all the other cards that go with it. The other cards that go with the number 8, and I call it the constellation of Strength. The other cards that go with it are, of course, the Star in the Major Arcana, because that adds up to 8 when you add the 1 and the 7. And over here we have the 4 8s of the Minor Arcana. They are all part of the constellation as well. But look, we have some cards along here that are not strictly part of the constellation, but I want to show you the cards, and I want you to see, first of all, if there's anything about them, and I show them to you one by one, that makes you think, oh yes, there's something there that relates to 8 and 8ness. This one's a kind of trickiest one of all. In fact, I'll tell you what this one is because it's not so obvious. There are 8 spokes on the Wheel of Fortune. That's a bit of a stretch. What's not a stretch is, looky. Here we have, above the Magician's head, the very same lemniscate, which is actually just a turned around number 8. Look at that. As we have on the Strength card. So the Magician and Strength card have got something in common with the turned round lemniscate. And it appears again on the number 2 of the 2 of Pentacles. You can see it in the motion of the juggling that's going on. And it also appears a bit more subtly in the World card. And where it appears, you don't see the whole thing, but these bows, if you took away the wreath and you just saw the shape of the bows, they would in fact be in the shape of the lemniscate, which is the 8 turned on its side. Why is this relevant, I hear you ask? Well, it's simply because the lemniscate is a symbol, as many of you will know, is a symbol that means eternity. It's a symbol that relates to cycles and things going back on themselves, and we've been talking in the last few videos about this process that the numbers are going through, and I spoke about the notion of when we get to number 5, humanity appears in the sequence of numbers. Number 6, there's a kind of a turning back, that backward spiral where the process of beginning to look back is appearing. And then with the 7, we have that kind of introspective approach, that self-awareness approach that I spoke about in the last video on numbers, the number 7. And when we get to the number 8, the lemniscate, effectively what the numbers are saying to us is, or we are perhaps saying, if we embody the numbers, is I am infinite. And when I say I mean I in the sense of all of us. So I am infinite, I am everything. And that's what the numbers, and that's what the tarot numbers are teaching us ultimately. We come from nothingness, which is everythingness, and we go back to nothingness, which is everythingness, and in fact we never stop being that. We are already that. We are eternal, everything is eternal, etc, etc, etc. And the number 8 reminds us of that in a very, very big way. And after all, what could be stronger? What could have more strength than the awareness that we are infinite? So that is just my very first impressions on the numbers. And now let's look in a bit more detail at the properties, the mathematical and magical properties of the number 8. There are some rather interesting synchronicities going on. When I finished filming that last section, I glanced at the timer on my camera and I had been filming for exactly 8 minutes. What do you think of that? Now, it won't be 8 minutes when you see it, of course, because actually a lot of that time spent filming was me faffing about and making mistakes and falling off my plinth that I was standing on to show my t-shirt and all that kind of stuff. And I had to edit all that, or will have to edit all of that out, so it won't be 8 minutes when you saw it, but it was 8 minutes when I saw it. So that, I think, is pretty cool. And, excuse me, look at this. I've got a bit of sellotape in my mouth because I have been wrapping tarot decks. There's a pile of parcels on the floor down here. I've been selling some of my tarot decks, and yeah, I just felt the need for a clear out, and so I've been packaging them up, and I'm going to be taking them to the post office tomorrow. So the place is a bit of a bomb site, but we won't worry about that because you don't need to see it. Now, I will need my glasses for this next bit as we move on to the number side of things. So yes, we have reached the birth of the octagon, and thank you 𝙍𝙬𝙍𝙊𝙎 for posting in the Tarot to the Nines Facebook group that marvellous diagram showing the eightfoldness of, I can't remember what it was called now, but the cathedral-y thing. Those of you who are not already in the Tarot to the Nines Facebook group should definitely join the Tarot to the Nines Facebook group, because there's a great bunch of people in there and we have all kinds of interesting conversations, partly about this video series, but then all the other things that spin off from that. So the link to that, as ever, is down below this video. So, oh yes, now I'm going to start by reading you some quotes. There are some quotes from my trusty book, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. This is why I need the glasses as well, so I can read these in this slightly dimmed light. And you will see from this that there are some rather interesting sort of relations to 8 in terms of philosophy and so on, particularly emphasised in Oriental myth and symbolism. And the quotes are, so this one, the first one is from Confucius, and it's a commentary on the I Ching. We'll come on to the I Ching in a little while. Change, says Confucius, has an absolute limit. This produces 2 modes. The 2 modes produce 4 forms. The 4 forms produce 8 trigrams. The 8 trigrams determine fortune and misfortune. So remember, Wheel of Fortune, the I Ching is very much related to the idea of fortune and misfortune. And incidentally, there's the mention here of 4 form, the 2 modes producing 4 forms and so on, that kind of doubling up of 4, reminds us that 8 is the double of 4. In fact, in some language, I can't remember, it might be some Arabic language, it literally means 2 4s or double 4. So that's kind of interesting, and it relates to the idea of double structure. Now 4, remember, the constellation of the Emperor was about structure. So I tend to think of the 8, partly anyway, think of the 8 as being about double order, or perhaps more accurately, a more fundamental order. And again, we might argue that infinity, we spoke about infinity, the infinity symbol, in a sense, that is the more fundamental order that underlies the universe that we perceive as being temporal and time-bound and space-bound and so on. So there are some interesting meanings in the way that the number appears as this doubling of 4. And the other quote that I want to read you comes from the Buddha, and I don't know what text this is from, but this is what it says. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the way that leads to the cessation of sorrow. This is the noble eightfold way, namely, right views, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So we have there in Buddhism the idea of the Eightfold Way, and you see in other Oriental systems that this idea of eightness comes up again. So the Chinese have 8 immortal saints in some of their sacred texts. They also talk about the 8 directions of wind, and in Egypt there's a sense of eightness as well. And another quote for you from the same book is from an Egyptian creation myth, and this goes: I am one that transforms into 2. I am 2 that transforms into 4. I am 4 that transforms into 8. After this, I am 1 again. So again, the idea that when we get to the 8 and this idea of eternity, we return to the idea of unity and oneness. Now, I can't remember the exact quote, and if I can find it, I'll post it below. But there's a very good quote, very interesting quote from Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, and it's something along the lines of eternity is not a very long time. Eternity is an understanding that we exist beyond time, or something like that. It's that kind of idea, and that's very much what comes across in that creation myth. By the way, there are the 8 immortals of Chinese myth. A lovely little picture of them in this book. I don't know what they're doing there, having some kind of hootenanny, but they're there and they're immortal, and it's marvellous. So yes, so that's the Egyptian myths. Now let me just have another look. Now you see, this is what I'm doing. I'm so unused to these glasses. I hardly ever use my reading glasses. So this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to read using the reading glasses, and I'm looking over the glasses at the text and thinking, why can't I read this? It's because I'm not looking through my effing glasses. I don't know why I don't just say the full word, but, well, you see, it's my Presbyterian upbringing. I find it difficult to swear on camera. My brain wanted to swear there, but my mouth wouldn't do it. That's fascinating. Anyway, so, where are we? So, yeah, the quote, Egyptian quote, and then, now, that's the other thing I want to show you. I want to show you some pictures now. And this relates actually to the thing that 𝙍𝙬𝙍𝙍 shared in the group, where you see, in the natural world, you can see pictures of the octagon. These are mainly kind of jellyfish and other similar sea creatures, glass sponges, and the male maple flower there, all of which are based on the kind of octagonal kind of structure. And you also see it in some art and some structural things. So as well as kind of living forms, we also see it in the way Islamic, for example, architecture has 8-fold forms, which they call, this is how they tile things, and sometimes have pillars built and so on, and they call it the breath of the compassionate. And actually there's a quote here which explains what this is. Islamic tradition holds that there are 100 names of God, but only 99 are knowable and speakable, and they are called the 99 beautiful names of Allah. The highest pronounceable name is the compassionate. From his infinite goodness, the compassionate exhales and inhales. Through the polar cycle of divine breath, the universe is periodically created, maintained, dissolved, and renewed. What were we saying? And Islamic design, in which the depiction of animals or humans is forbidden, symbolises this process through geometry, and the pattern known as the breath of the compassionate appears for Islamic art, and it's the kind of effectively the last name you, or the name you can give that's closest to God without actually naming God, and that's the pattern. Oh, that's not showing up very well. Let me just turn that down, because that's better. That's better, isn't it? Look at that. So you can see a lot of eightness, and now we're plunged into darkness again, so I'll turn the light on. So that is about the breath of the compassionate, and that's the structural side of thing. And then in there you saw, or you heard, this notion of creation, maintenance, dissolution, and recycling. This kind of idea of eternal recycling, which we see in the eternally entwining 8 that I have got up here. And now you see that elsewhere as well, and you see it in other kind of creation myths, and there are also relationships here to, and in fact it's very appropriate that my grandmother crone wall hanging is so visible in this video, because actually this next relation to 8 is about the symbol for the great mother goddess. And it says here, eightfold geometry is an ancient symbol for the great mother goddess as nourisher. Her substance clothes the archetypal patterns by crossing the 4 elements with 4 opposite qualities, and in this role she has often been depicted mythologically as an 8-legged spider, from the word spinner. In Native American mythology, for example, the grandmother spider weaves the web of matter. In modern terms, this would be done by intricately crossing polarities, electrons and protons, the warp and woof of each atomic knot. The Greek word cosmos, with a K, which literally signifies embroidery, and many of the great goddesses of myth, the Egyptian Neith, Nutet and Isis, the Greek Athena and the 3 Fates, and the Mayan 𝙍𝙀𝙎𝙊, are spinstresses, weavers and embroiderers, manifesting the world while spinning the threads of fate for humans and the entire cosmos. And of course, you know, spiders are, again with the light, spiders are 8-legged creatures, and there is the Native American one. And you actually see this in other kind of things as well. So it's not just spiders, but in some cultures the mother goddess is depicted as an octopus and so on. 8 legs of the spider, 8 tentacles of the octopus, and 8 directions of a Hindu Kali Yantra meditation mandala all symbolize the ensnaring, devouring, terrible aspect of the great mother goddess. There's the mandala. So again, this idea of 8ness being intricately involved in creation, maintenance, dissolution and destruction, this kind of eternal recycling and recycling and recycling. And you begin to see this quite literally if you look at the periodic table of the elements. And I'm sorry to keep doing this with the light, but it's the only way I can show you and then still be visible afterwards. But in this book it shows you the periodic table of the elements. Now it's too complicated to go into, and I'm not going to attempt to try and remember enough high school science to be able to explain this in any cogent way. But basically what is being said here is that there are 8 levels of atomic structure in terms of the number of atoms or the number of electrons that sit around an atom, and the levels of, if you like, atomic creation can be classed as 8. There are 7 octaves with 8 levels in them, because when you get to at the end of each of the rows in the periodic table, the atoms that are at the end of these rows are fully populated by their number of electrons they can have, and then they go up a level, and that can happen 8 times. So there's something fundamentally 8-ish about atomic structures, and the way that they all fit together. And then we also see this in the next thing that I want to talk to you about, which is about the I Ching. And again, it's almost as though the I Ching is a representative, or a similar representative, of this cycle of creation, except in a slightly more esoteric and psychological and mythological way. So and in fact, in this book, what it says is that in many ways the I Ching is like the periodic table of elements. Both systems are based on various combinations of polarity and periodic renewal. But instead of looking at things and structures like atoms and molecules, the I Ching depicts the cosmos as dynamic events, as distinct stages of transformation, the processes that link things together. This process was called the Tao, the way of natural law. And of course, the I Ching is formed by these different dots and dashes. So you start off with the unbroken line and the broken line, and then they can be paired together, and then they can be put together in triplets. And what you get is 8 groups of 3 lines. So these are the 8 trigrams, 0 through to 7, and those trigrams can then go on and form the hexagrams of the I Ching. And what's rather interesting is that the hexagrams of the I Ching, once you do this, you actually have 8 hexagrams by 8 hexagrams to give 64 in total, so it's 8 times 8, and you get 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, and from that all of the wisdom of the I Ching is imparted, because it's the way that those trigrams combined give you the 64 different hexagrams, and that then enables you to, when you're divining with the I Ching, to find your way to one of those hexagrams, and it will give you specific advice. And if you want to be really kind of mind blown, the interesting thing there is that there are links to, in terms of the numerical idea, there are links to, apart from the I Ching and the atomic table, there are links to, again, you cannot, oh, that's better, it suddenly appeared out of the light, DNA. And the reason there are links to it in terms of the number 8 is investigations into the genetic code have revealed that DNA is composed of 64 6-part codons, or genetic words. So in other words, the language of creation, the language of the I Ching in terms of the way, the Tao, the language of the atomic table, the language of our DNA is, you could argue, is broken up into words of 8, or eight words. There are 8 segments that make up the whole of the language. So that is a slightly garbled blether through the properties of the number 8. But I think it's fascinating that number 8 is so visibly about this kind of cycling, and is so visibly about eternity, and appears so much in the tarot, and also is encoded into atomic structures and DNA, etc., etc. And here's another interesting thing that I noticed as I was pulling this together. If we count the minors as one group, so they're, the number 8 as it appears in the minors, and then we look at the other cards, how many of them are there? So one set of minors, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 cards of 8ness in this slightly expanded tarot constellation. So that's a bit about the eternally entwining 8, and now we're going to talk about the cards themselves. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the cards, and probably I don't need my glasses for this part. So the first thing I want to just draw to your attention, I mentioned that we could use strength and justice interchangeably, and there are different meanings of strength and justice when you're reading tarot cards. I'm not going to suggest for a minute that they are the same. Of course they're not. They are different cards, and the numbering is interchangeable only because there are different systems that use different numbering, and sometimes you have justice as 8, sometimes you have strength as 8, and vice versa. What's interesting for me about it is this notion of balance. So the other thing that we see in the lemniscate, and it's really well illustrated in this pip of the juggler, the 2 of Pentacles, is this idea of balance. So the recycling and the kind of constant moving and reuse of the fundamental ground of being of creation, that constant kind of journey of creation appearing and dissolving and appearing again, is very much about balance. And you see balance, of course, in justice with the scales, but you also see balance in strength, the idea of balancing your nature, your animal nature with your human nature, and seeking some kind of accord there. So there's something there about balance, and I think we can also say that that appears to some extent in the star card as well, where you have the star, the woman on the star, pouring water into water and also onto the ground. And the other thing that's interesting is that, as well as pouring water into water and water onto the ground, and making no differentiation between those two in terms of the way she's behaving, she also is resting on solid ground, but it also looks as though she is resting on water, as though the water were solid. So here we see a balance between the water and the ground, which makes them almost indistinguishable in the way that they're behaving, and yet of course they are distinguishable because they are different things. But there's something there about a profound sense of inner balance, and it's really rather remarkable. And of course, if you look really closely, you'll see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stars. So that is the star. And then in terms of the other major arcana that we talked about, I've already mentioned the idea of the Wheel of Fortune and this whole notion of creation and life and existence and our psychological selves and our physical selves being constantly recycled is just so well illustrated on the Wheel of Fortune. The idea that the Wheel of Fortune is constantly moving, constantly changing, and we are on that Wheel of Fortune and our lives change along with it. And then we see the balance, of course, in the Magician card, as above, so below. This notion that there is a matching between what is inside and what is outside. And then the World, of course, at the other end of the major arcana journey, where we see this kind of resolution to the journey of the trumps and the idea of the lemniscate and eternity, which is kind of neatly encircled now and joined together into a complete whole. So there's lots there about balance. When it comes to the minors, I think the minors are interesting because, of course, the way that we look at this in looking at tarot constellations is that the minors, or the way that I look at it, is that the minors represent challenges and opportunities. And it seems to me that the minors are all about balancing movement with stasis, if you like. So in the swords, we have this woman who is encircled by 8 swords and blindfolded and tied up. And you know, it's not a card that looks particularly inviting. It's not one that you like to see in a reading necessarily, because it looks like it's more of an obstacle than an opportunity. However, of course, there are no swords blocking her way out. She could just walk out of this circle, and even though she's blindfolded, she could probably walk out of it without any problems. So there's something there about the choice between movement and being stuck. And of course, when we are stuck, even though we're not physically stuck, it's very often it's our mind, it's our mental state that will keep us stuck. That's not to say, I'm not suggesting by that when we are in a stuck place, it's because it's all in the mind. That's not what I mean. But I think, you know, I certainly know that there are times when I don't move forward, when I could move forward, but something inside me is telling me that I can't. And so the 8 of Swords reminds us to challenge our limiting and rethink our limiting beliefs. Here we have an image of somebody who does seem to be walking away very intentionally, striding away from the 8 cups. So there's a movement in this card. There's the suggestion perhaps of things that are slightly hidden. It's night time, the moon is out. It's a full moon, so hidden but also lit up by the light of subconscious emotions, etc., represented by cups. The 8 of Wands is one of my favourite cards in the deck, and to me this just absolutely represents movement, energy. There's lots of debates about whether the wands are flying upwards or flying downwards. I tend to always see them as flying upwards. I think they are going up. I think of it as a positive card. But in some decks and in some systems, one of the words that's associated with the 8 of Wands is fall. So it is possible to read this not so much as forward motion, but as something coming towards you. And then we have 8 of Pentacles, and this is an interesting one because there's not really anything there that suggests kind of, well, balance in the sense of this guy obviously knows how to balance his chisel and his hammer in order to get these perfectly formed pentacles. And there's the idea of him being very productive and moving forward in his work and producing all these pentacles. But there's something also there about a kind of, you can imagine him being in the flow and being kind of still in his mind and concentrated in his mind even as he works. So perhaps there is something there about balance between mind and body. So those are the cards, quick canter through the cards, and I think there's some interesting things there about balance, about looking at how we marry our sense of motion and our sense of mindfulness. So one of the things that perhaps the symbol of the lemniscate is suggesting to us is, yes, there is motion, constant change, but there is a still point in the middle. And if eternity is anything, you know, going back to my badly paraphrased Joseph Campbell quote, if eternity is anything, it's not the kind of endlessness of time, it's the stillness, the still point in time, the point where there is no time, there is no space, and yet there is everything. So that's a quick canter through the cards. I want to finish by sharing with you a very quick spread, which I think might be quite interesting for you to explore the concept of strength with a bit more. Back in a sec. Okay, and there it is. I'm suggesting a one card reading for this. One card drawn to answer one question, and that question is, what is your strength? What is your strength? Now, the reason I'm suggesting one card, you don't have to do one card, you can do as many cards as you like. You can do one card and then you can, pull clarifying cards if you would like. But the reason I'm suggesting one card relates to this symbol of the lemniscate, and actually relates to a topic that I probably will do a video on at some point, and that is the notion of diving deep into a card when we pull it in a reading, because I see it in myself. So I'm not saying anything that I'm not guilty of. I see it in myself, but I also see it when other people do readings, either for themselves or for others, that sometimes there is a temptation to move too quickly away from a card that has been pulled to answer a specific question, either because it's a bit difficult to deal with, or because it's a bit difficult to understand, or simply because there's so many other questions that need to be answered that one wants to move on. I find that there can be an incredible richness in really dropping into one card in a reading and really allowing ourselves to sink into the meaning. So what that suggests to me in terms of this lemniscate symbol is the idea that you ask this question, you get into a meditative state, you ask the question, you shuffle your cards, and you pull your card to answer the question, what is your strength? And whatever you get, whatever card you get, whether you immediately recognise it as having answered the question or not, whether you think straight away, oh yeah, I get that, or not, you might look at it and think, I've got no clue. What I want you to do is to keep coming back to it, perhaps over the space of a day, maybe even the space of a week. Keep cycling back to it. So you come back to it, you go away from it, then you come back to it again, you go away from it, you come back to it, etc., etc., as many times as you like. And each time you come at it as fresh as you can, but with the knowledge you've already gleaned, of course, and you keep asking, what is your strength, and seeing what card comes up and allowing it to show you the answer. And you can journal with it. You can, if you, let's say you pulled the six of rods for this, then, or six of wands for this, you know, you could then pull that card, the six of wands, from a whole range of different decks and look at it if you wanted to do that. But stick with the six of wands. Don't try and go with other cards if you're doing one card reading. So that's just my suggestion, and I'd be interested to hear from you how it goes if you indeed choose to follow this suggestion and ask the question, what is your strength, with a one card draw. So until next time, and our next and last number, the number 9. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again very soon.